If you hate me, then I definitely hate you too. But Jesus corrected this and reminded them, in Leviticus 19 verse 18, love your neighbor. In fact, he took this command to a new level, for he said, love your enemies, return good for evil. I want you to take note of this, brethren. This is a command of Jesus. He doesn't give us an option whether or not we want to love our enemies, but rather he commands, he demands us to love our enemies. We cannot get around it. We cannot interpret it in any other way we want to interpret. It is very clear. He said, there is no other choice. Love your enemies. And to me, friends, this is one of the greatest challenges that we need to obey. So let me just bring this down to an everyday level. Let me ask. Is there anyone in your life whom you hate or just can't stand to be with? Maybe someone who irritates you to no end, someone whom you resent and feel bitterness towards. Well, let me say this. Do you have someone in mind whom you don't like and consider him or her as your enemy? Do you have? If you have friends, are you proud of that? Does it make you happy? Well, my suspicion is that most of us have someone we don't like. Or perhaps there are even some who may have multiple people in their lives who cause them anger, hatred, and resentment for something they have done in the past. These people are your enemies. You hate them. You dislike them. And I also suspect that the anger, the hatred, and the resentment that is possessing our lives is destructive and counterproductive. So try, friends, to picture in your mind the person you hate or the one you dislike most and see if it is easy for you to love him or her. What do you think? Do you think it's easy to love your enemies? Can you manage to love your enemy? I'm telling you, it is never easy to love someone who is hurting us. It's not easy to love our enemies. So, this is indeed a very challenging command that God has given us. Loving and accepting those who threaten us and intimidate us remains a formidable challenge, but God wants us to do it. So my question this morning is, how are we going to do it? Well, I suggest that we ask this guy. You know this? We asked Joseph how he did it. Of all the Bible characters, Joseph, the son of Jacob, is the best mentor who can teach us on how to love our enemies, how to love the person that we hate most. Besides Joseph's life, it gives us a glimpse of the life of Jesus. So let's take a look at how he coped up with his bitterness, his bitter experiences. As we all know, Joseph had lots of people who planted seeds of bitterness and resentment in his life, beginning with his own father, who showed too much favoritism to him. This was, in fact, what nurtured bitterness and resentment among his brothers. And no doubt, he could have hated them when they sold him into slavery, right? He could have harbored bitterness and anger against Potiphar's wife, who framed him up, or Potiphar who threw him in jail. He could have hated the cupbearer who promised that he will remember him after he interpreted his dream, but due to his negligence, Joseph remained in the jail for more years. So how easy it was for him to just wallow in bitterness and anger, but he didn't do that. Instead, through his experiences, he teaches us a healthy way to do when we want to get even with the one who hurt us. He demonstrated to us a perfect example how to love and accept our enemies. He had proven to us that it is really possible to love our enemies. It is possible to obey the command of Christ and in loving our enemies. So let's look at how he did it. What are the steps he followed in order to be able to love his enemies? Genesis 39 verses 20 to 21, when Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were confined. And he was there in prison, but the Lord was with God and showed him mercy, and he gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. All throughout the whole series of injustice in the life of Joseph, he, look at this, he acknowledged God's presence in his life. This was the first step that he did. He recognized the presence of the Lord in his life. You know, when we miss the presence and the grace of God, bitterness is born and it flourishes until it eats all of our life. And the truth is, the more we immerse ourselves in God's presence and in His grace, the more likely we are to give grace to others. You know, Stella, my beloved wife, you know, it's not easy to be pastor's wife, you know. Because they are always being used as an illustration. You know, Estella got lots of ornamental plants around the house. That is. If you come to visit our place, you will notice these beautiful flowers around. Every day, as soon as she gets up in the morning, she would step out into the yard, spend most of her time in her garden. It's amazing, she always had something to do every day. She always had something to do in her garden. During her off days, she would be with her flowers all day. Even when the sun is burning hot, she'd enjoy working and talking to the flowers. In fact, she would even go to our neighbor's garden and intrude there. She would trespass and, you know, she would water the plants of the neighbors. But you know what? I have noticed is this. The longer she spends time with the flowers, the more she smells like flowers. And the more she smells like flowers, the more I like to be with her. So how did Joseph cope up with the hatred and anger that he had with his enemies? By acknowledging the presence of God in his life. Instead of demanding payment or finding ways to get even, he rather pondered on the deeds of God in his life. Although he was in jail, he chooses to let the presence of God free him from the prison of anger and depression. He did not allow the load of bitterness to break his heart, but rather he unloaded it all into the presence of God, because it is in the heart of God that he found comfort and peace even in times of crisis. And then there's another one. Another step in the formula that Joseph had to handle. Bitterness that enabled him to love his enemies. Genesis 50, verses 18 to 21. Then his brothers also went and fell down before his face. And they said, "Behold, we are your servants." Joseph said to them, "Do not be afraid, for I am in the place, for am I in the place of God? But as for you, you meant evil against me. But God meant it for good in order to bring it about as it is this day, to save many people alive. Now therefore do not be afraid. I will provide for you and your little ones." And he comforted them and he spoke kindly to them. So it's not only that he acknowledged the presence of God in his life, but I see in here that Joseph was at peace with everyone because he let God be God by being not judgmental. He just allowed God to be in charge of everything. He acknowledged that what his brothers did to him was a part of God's plan to save many people. You know, this could have been a very